Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Dr. Eric Claville was among the first in our area to predict right here on Another View that Donald Trump would become president of the United States. Many had doubts, but turns out his prediction was spot on. Up next on Another View, Dr. Claville is back with his predictions about the 2020 presidential race. What role does today's economy, global trade issues, immigration, and race relations play, and who will become our next president? Stay with us. Another View is coming up next.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Let me start by saying thank you to all of you who decided to become members during our pledge drive last Friday. We raised over $8,000 in the hour that we had for Another View. So I am so stoked. And on behalf of Lisa and Todd, we just say thank you so very much for believing in us and supporting the show. Pardon me. I am so sorry. And there are a couple of things that are going on in the community that I want to bring to your attention before we get to Dr. Eric Claville with his Claville Report. I want to tell you about an event on September 26th through 28th in Newport News called I'm My Own Mirror's Image. It's a health and wellness conference with educational information on living a clean lifestyle, forming healthy habits, and a new financial mindset. And again, it is set for September 26th through 28th at the Marriott Center City in Newport News. For more information, call area code 877-393-1818 or visit orioshay.com. And that's spelled ORIASOSHAY.com. Pardon me, my allergies acting up today. Also in Newport News, Arena Productions is producing a full-length documentary called Front Porch Chronicles East End. Now, this is the story of the people, places, and events of the East End of Newport News, and they want to talk to you. So if you'd like to participate, call 757-975-3116. Or you can email them at frontporchchronicles2@gmail.com. That's frontporchchronicles2@gmail.com if you'd like to be in that documentary. And finally, next Wednesday through Friday, September 25 through 27. I hope you will join me for the 1619 Making of America Summit at Norfolk State University. And we're going to be talking about diversity, democracy, and opportunity, and answering the question, who are we as Americans? All kinds of outstanding featured speakers. There will be a historic after-summit tour. There will be discussions and work groups and workshops. You can register by going to AmericanEvolution2019.com/1619 Summit. That's AmericanEvolution2019.com/1619 Summit. I will be there on Thursday. I'll be talking with Nate Parker and other filmmakers, and we'll be talking about how people of color are depicted in film and the media. So it should be a great day. Please come on out and join us at Norfolk State University. And speaking of Norfolk State University, when I talk with listeners about Another View, they tell me that they love Dr. Eric Claville's ability to analyze law and politics and make it all make sense. Well, he's back with us again, this time with his prediction about the 2020 presidential election. Dr. Claville is a political and legal analyst and the brand new director of the brand new Center for African American Public Policy at NSU. How you doing, doing, Eric?
Wonderful. Thank you, Barbara.
Great. Thank you. So glad to have you here today. So first, before we talk about anything else, what is the African American Public Policy Center?
Sure. So the Center for African American Public Policy is a think tank that provides an unbiased and nonpartisan research on public policy issues affecting African Americans and other persons of color in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and also locally in the Hampton Roads area and throughout where African Americans are within the state. Now, the mission of the center is to primarily empower communities of color, educate the public at large, and assist lawmakers in providing alternatives on issues that involves African Americans, their communities, their issues, and also other persons of color. In other words, it gives these communities of color that normally are not at the table another voice to be at the table to really discuss their issues and how public policy, I'm a believer of public policy and positive public policy that can really affect people in a positive way, short term, but more specifically for the long term and for their generation. So if you're not at the table, more than likely you're on the menu.
Exactly.
Right? So and very quickly, a lot of times think tanks, they tend to create policy from the top down, saying that this is what we believe that you should do, therefore go. And then they give it to the masses.
They give it to the masses to do it.
The difference in our center is that we're working from the ground up. We're going to the people. We have a community council that we're forming along with our board of advisors, where we're going to the community, the people that are actually doing the work, finding out what those issues are in the area of education, criminal justice reform, community issues such as family, housing, and again, economics. So to determine what works, what hasn't worked, where are you struggling, what do you think that you need, and to find where those effects of current public policy are affecting them. So
you're busy putting this all together
Yes,
because this is literally just getting off the ground. Is that right?
It is. Okay. So we've kicked it off with a wonderful criminal justice reform symposium and forum actually at NSU a couple of weeks ago. That was well attended. We had every stakeholder from the criminal justice area within the Commonwealth. And so they were there. We had 350 to 400 persons attending that from the community, from the academic area and so forth. So it's a center that is research-based. We have a resident statistician. We have resident scholars. We also have fellows that will be announced. We have our ambassadors as well that would be working with our center, student ambassador, that is graduate students, and again, research-based, evidence-based to show what works and what doesn't.
Perfect. Well, we'll do some other shows on policy that'll be coming out of the center as we move forward. So let's talk about, we're going to hold off on your prediction because you scare me. But we're going to hold off on your prediction. But I want to talk about some of our, or the top 10 candidates on the Democratic side. Let's start there as we talk about the 2020 election. So we've got the top 10. So they would be Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Peter Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Andrew Yang, Beto O'Rourke, Julian Castro, and Amy Klobuchar. Are any of them paying any or have in their platform anything that would be of particular interest or help for the African American community?
Well, first of all, Barbara, let's say that top 10, there are other candidates out there still in the race.
That's true.
I think the total was...
top 10 right now. Right? Let's put it that way.
I think the total was about 21, 22 persons.
Yeah, when it started.
Right. And, of course, Mayor de Blasio just dropped out today after failing to pick up traction. It's very hard as a political junkie. It's very hard to watch because when you see the candidates that are there, the two leading candidates themselves, all right, so the Democratic Party touts itself as being the most diverse party out there. However, the two best chances to win presidency are two older white males who are close to 80 years old, if not. Now that's not I'm not saying that's an issue, but what I'm saying is when you tout diversity and you tout these things in your platform, and then you look at your candidates, it kind of speaks volumes. In addition to that, when they talk about policy, there's really not a lot of policy that Black America, we mean African Americans who are in African American majority neighborhoods, can really attach themselves to and say, you know what, they really are for me. I'm going to come out and really not just vote, but I'm going to talk to my friends and have them come to the polls. That was one of the issues that we talked about in 2015, 2016, that the Democratic Party was failing.
There was nothing there to grab them to make them come out and vote.
Right, and there was no organized effort, no financial effort within the African American community to get those votes out. In addition to that, the day of the election, persons really showed, so in the state of Michigan, I think it was 10,000 individuals who were able to vote actually did not come out to vote, African Americans that is, because there was nothing speaking to them. And again, we believe that you should participate in the democratic process. But in order to participate, you have to have a stake in it. And the question becomes, what was the difference between the African American community from George Bush, the son, to Barack Obama, to now Donald Trump? And the answer is absolutely nothing. I mean, it's actually gotten worse. There have been no policies to really address the issues and the ills to help uplift those communities. Again, we're not talking about a handout, but rather a hand up. If anything, those communities have been continually decimated, by the ills that have affected them for decades.
So then, do people then get confused because when you hear a Kamala Harris or a Cory Booker pushing back at a Joe Biden about, your time that you spent or the way that you voted on busing or, issues like that? Is that just confusing the situation or making it seem like, oh, well, since they're talking about race, they clearly must be doing something to help us? Or is it more, just an overshadow to say that this is a distraction? And when you really look at policy that's going to make a difference on a day-to-day basis, there's nothing there.
Yeah, Barb, I think it's the latter. It's a distraction, really, and it's kind of like crabs in a bucket. They're shooting at themselves. They're basically destroying themselves, demolishing. While the Republican Party and Trump just sitting back and just waiting, to pounce on the weakest one, which whoever comes out will end up being the weakest one because they've gone through this very, very tough primary that they're going through. When you talk about Joe Biden and you talk about other legislators during that time period of the 60s and 70s and even the 80s, people, you can't judge a person by that one decision they make, right? I'm a strong believer that a forgiven Apostle Paul is much better than a dead Saul. In other words, you can do much more if you just sit down and listen and have a conversation with people to change their mind. I mean, keep in mind, on his way to Damascus, God had a conversation with Saul, and he changed his mind. And he helped to change the world from that perspective as it relates to Christianity. So individuals voted the way that they voted because of situations and circumstances that existed during that time period. So that's pretty much done. Because if you ask the average African American today, right, who are what we call millennial or Gen Xers or Zers, you ask them about busing, they're like,
what are you talking about?
Exactly. It has absolutely no immediate impact on their daily existence. If anything, they're wanting to be safer, at schools. They're wanting to have qualified teachers, in the classrooms teaching them, and they want to be able to be heard, right? And really understand, because children, no matter, what they do, they really want to learn. All children do. So, I believe it's a total distraction. I believe that they are damaging the front runner who could win the election and win the nomination. But we'll get into that later.
So are we as a people, just in general, and I know I'm speaking generalities because obviously there's some who are more and some who are less, but are we as a people more politically savvy today than yesterday?
I think we, that's a loaded question, right? So in general, I would say yes, we are. politically savvy. Now, how does that actually work for the betterment of the African American community itself? For people who have access and people who can go and access the system, right? From that standpoint, we're more politically savvy. But the impact on the community and the people at the bottom, it doesn't help them at all, because the movements, there really are not a lot of movements to help them. Before, of course, we had the Civil Rights Movement, which is the most memorable of the 60s, and then the changes with the Civil Rights legislation on the LBJ, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, Civil Rights legislation. The last key legislation that really helped to change on the ground floor with the Fair Housing Act, right? That really gave African Americans and people of color an opportunity to really lift themselves up and move into neighborhoods to, that they can get better opportunities in. Other than that, there really hasn't been any legislation that came out to really help African Americans. Because keep in mind, during the Nixon administration and John Ehrlichman drafting domestic policy to really decimate African-American neighborhoods. And keep in mind, this was right after the Negro family, the Moynihan Report came out. The policies that were written under, and again, agency policies that were passed under Nixon really helped to start the destruction of the African-American community. I call it the Claudine effect. With social programs, the famous movie with Diane Carroll, where, her and James Earl Jones were dating, but they couldn't be married because you couldn't have a man in the house if you had social services, so you had to leave. And they finally got married at the end, of course. But while they were all in the paddy wagon going to jail. I love that movie, though. I love it. But then you go into the 1980s, and then you see the prison policies that were passed. Now, keep in mind, under prison policies, a lot of African-American congresspersons voted for those. For that.
It was presented as being tough on crime,
right,
when in fact it was mainly locking up African-American males in record numbers.
And of course, I was at a forum where Congressman Clyburn, whose wife just passed, Emily Clyburn, out of South Carolina, on yesterday. But he admitted, he said, look, we didn't read the thing, we just signed it. And a lot of bills, a lot of congressmen don't read it. Their party puts it out, special interest comes in and say, hey, do this and do that. And they just sign it and be done with it. But those prison policies guarantee private prisons 80% occupancy. How can you guarantee 80% occupancy in a prison unless you pass public policy that actually guarantees longer sentences and guarantees that contract and to live up to it? And if they didn't guarantee the 80%, the federal government didn't pay them.
So then what's the incentive? If I'm a poorer person, and life is not going that great for me anyway, what is my incentive for going into that voting booth?
If you really care about, and again, this really affects your life. If the way that the government is being ran, the way you see democracy now, the way that we have a world in chaos, right? Then you're like, we need change. Let me go out and vote for the best candidate that's out there on either side of the aisle, who's running. But the issue is, Barbara, is that many people are trying to make it day to day. Many people are trying to make sure that their kids are doing well in school. Many people are trying to make sure that food is on the table. They're trying to meet car repairs. They're trying to pay the mortgage or the rent. They're trying to keep their families together. The last thing on their mind is listening to a bunch of, talking heads around a table, trying to find, a soundbite to get them out of office and, do an interview and the 72 hours of bad press on them and see if it works. No, they don't have time for that because they're really struggling. And absolutely no one is talking about the struggles of the working middle class. And again, I don't call it the middle class; it's the working middle class. Because if you stop working, you're no longer middle class.
That's true.
So the working middle class, the people who are what we call the working poor, the blue collar workers, those in what we call now the what is the economy? Is it the gypsy economy or
the gig economy?
Yeah. individuals in the gig economy who are working these multiple,
yes,
jobs.
when you go from place to place to place to place, working multiple jobs.
Right, with no benefits,
Exactly.
no retirement, and so forth. I mean, it's pretty bad, and nobody's talking to them. And we'll get into the issues and the topics that I believe that we need to pay attention to, and I think the issues that are going to decide this election when we start talking about the U.S. economy and the global economy itself. It's only going to get worse, and the indicators are there. And anybody who pays attention to, Fed policy, other than me, whoever, reads the the Fed president report that he puts out or the briefing, that it's about to be
okay. Let's get to that quickly. Let me ask you about on the other side, because there are some people who are running or who want to challenge President Trump.
Yeah.
Should we be paying attention to that? Not?
Absolutely not. I mean, you can if you want to, but even Mark Sanford himself, he said, look, I'm just raising the issue that we need we've lost our way as far as conservatives, but if Trump is our nominee, I'm going to vote for him. Well, if you're trying to be a change agent, then you kind of just X yourself out, right? So nobody's really paying attention to Mark Sanford. I don't know who the other person is. That's
Joe Walsh.
Yeah. So again, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't seem to carry a lot of weight. But yeah, those are the two that have stepped forward so far.
Put it this way: if Trump's not attacking you on Twitter, you're not worth it, right?
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about marching towards the 2020 election. Okay, so let's talk about the economy. Well, how is that going to play in helping us to make our determinations when we go to the booth in November 2020?
So let's look at the foundation of the economy and then how it affects people very quickly.
Okay.
So let's look at the economy globally. Globally, the economies of the world are not in good shape. They're either unstable or they're bankrupt. The economies of the world some of that are bankrupt are Greenland, Greece, Egypt, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Argentina, etc. Okay?
Totally upside down.
Totally upside down.
Okay.
Absolutely. The economies that are unstable, okay? I mean, let's take a look at Great Britain right now. Our mother, the mother of America. I mean, it is an absolute circus. Great Britain, prim and proper, all things work together. You're probably, you're as witty as they come in Parliament, but, you work together, right? That's not the case. Great Britain is really crumbling, and their economy. There's nothing that Great Britain makes. Right. So when you look at an economy that makes when you look at good economies, what do you make that the rest of the world wants? Or what do you have naturally that the rest of the world wants? And what does Great Britain make that the rest of the world wants?
I don't know. What? Nothing?
Nothing. At this point, there's nothing there that they actually make. Right. So, which is why the big issue about U.S. manufacturing going overseas when executives from large companies were getting policy change through their lobbyists in Congress to move manufacturing overseas for cheaper labor, increase shareholder returns, increase their pockets, but hurt America. Well, it wasn't just hurting blue-collar workers, but it was hurting America as a whole, being able to produce. But we'll get into that in just a moment. So those economies are bankrupt. There are many that are unstable. Okay. Even China themselves, they're masking their problems. There are many factories that just stop operating because there's not a market out there where China can sell those goods. Now, with the U.S. economy and the U.S. dollar, if you really look at the numbers, they're being propped up by debt. And this is why nobody's paying attention to Mark Sanford. Now, again, it takes a lot of credit. I give a lot of credit. It takes a lot of bravery for anyone to run for public office. So hats off to every person. Even
if they step out there.
Right. Yeah, step out there. Even Marianne Williams, that wants to beat Trump with love and bring her, it's oh my gosh, it's hard to watch. But anyway, but nobody's listening to Sam because to be a Republican was about being a conservative, but being about low debt, right? Under the Republicans, I mean, we have increased the debt. Right now, the U.S. annual deficit is $1 trillion. That means that we bring in $3 trillion in taxes, because when we talked about 2 years ago, I told you that Steve Mnuchin was going to get that bill passed, the tax cut. And the wealthy, the 1%, they've made more money under Trump than they made under Reagan when he started privatizing government, than they made under George Bush the father, than they made under George Bush the son. I mean, they hand over fist profit. I mean, it was amazing. So it was a terrible, terrible, terrible tax bill. And the tax cut from the working class, I think they revert back in 2025, when a lot of people
President Trump was just in Baltimore last week and promised another tax cut for the middle class.
Well, of course, because, if I give you a few $100, you forget about, what's going on. You think they're the best person.
But my point being, if the Republicans are supposed to be all about bringing down the deficit, every time you cut taxes, aren't you raising the deficit?
Of course. I mean, but again, here's where hypocrisy comes in, because just like during the housing crisis, it was the executives from the rating agencies, from the reinsurance companies, ING, to the investment bankers. All of them really, really messed up the housing market. And so you thought that those are individuals that would pay. However, they blamed it on the poor. They blamed it on the people of color, communities of color, blamed it on social service. So they started attacking those. That's the same thing that's happening now.
Hang on one second, Eric. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the 2020 presidential election with political and legal analyst Dr. Eric Claville, director of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Okay, so
again, when you talk about this $1 trillion deficit, that raises our debt, which will be about $25 trillion by 2022, right? Probably a little bit sooner, but I say 2022. The GAO, the Accountability Office for the Governmental Accountability Office, says that's unsustainable. That debt is just we cannot sustain it. So the effects on the economy for the people of color and the average working class is that prices are going to go higher. Federal Reserve is they're going to try more quantitative easing. And let me say this. For the first,
meaning what?
Quantitative easing is basically putting more money into the economy. What Bernanke did. Was it Bernanke? I think it was out of Paulson. But basically, they brought in all the executives from the large banks, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, and so forth, and said, listen, we're going to give you $15 billion. We're going to give you $25 billion. We want you to inject it into the economy. Well, they got together and said, look, we're not loaning this money out. We're going to buy back our shares. And what they did, they increased the value of their banks by buying back their shares and became extremely bloated. So I don't know what the Federal Reserve is going to do when they start printing more money and, quote unquote, injecting funds into the economy, which is called
because their thought was that they were going to start lending that money out, that it would increase the economy,
and it did not happen at all. So it'll be what we call QE4, quantitative easing 4. In addition to that, what also will happen is that they will start to continue to cut interest rates. I believe, just like Alan Greenspan has stated, and I think he's on his redemption tour, right? Because I'll reserve that comment for later. But anyway, I believe we're headed toward negative interest rates. Negative interest rates for the economy, which means that when you put your money in a savings account, the money market, negative interest rates means in layman's terms that you'll be paying as opposed to gaining interest. It basically makes cheap money. And the idea of the Federal Reserve is that if you have cheap money into the market, then what will happen is people will borrow, people will lend, people will buy, people will build and get things going. But for the first time, I think since 2014, the Federal Reserve recently just started buying U.S. bonds. Now, why is that important? It's important because China stopped buying them. They started dumping them because we put tariffs on them. Okay, so it is what it is. Also, if nobody's buying our debt, then we can't borrow money. So therefore, the Federal Reserve said we'll start buying their debt, and then you can borrow more money. So that's what we're doing now. So it's kind of like if you're in your household, it's kind of like taking one credit card to pay off another credit card and saying, I'm running out of space on this credit card, so I need to get another credit card, right? So you go to a subprime company.
And you're still putting yourself deeper and deeper in debt as you go. Let's talk to Mark in Norfolk. Hi, Mark. You're on the air.
Hey, good. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hey, good. Just want to let Dr. Claville know that I was in full agreement with him when he forecasted that President Trump would win. And I just wanted to say I think the Democrats are on their way if they decide to push Joe Biden in the front of losing another presidential election.
Okay, we'll let him respond. Thanks, Mark, for the call.
Well, thank you very much for your comment, and thank you for listening to Another View. I'll respond to that with my prediction.
Okay.
There's a lie behind that, so I'll respond to it with that.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But again, the economy for the people, things are going to get worse. Exactly. So when things get worse, households start to pull back. So it's going to affect what you buy. You're going to keep that car a little bit longer. You're going to not buy as many new clothing, right? Just only the essentials. You're going to stop eating out, okay? Not only that, but you're going to say, well, I can't pay for room and board at college. So therefore, if I can't pay for room and board, you can live at home, okay? And you can go to school. Individuals who are young professionals that are losing their jobs, they're going to move back home. Older parents who can't sustain themselves because subsidies are being cut, things are getting more expensive. You have children that are going to move back home with them, or parents that are going to move back home. You're going to have homes that you can't move. So you're going to have mortgages that you're paying, a lot of foreclosures. So I really foresee a lot of family law issues. If I'm putting on my attorney hat, family law issues, a lot of bankruptcy issues, a lot of elder law issues coming from what we're getting ready to see moving down the pipe. Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the economy, what about all the rest of the world, the wars and so forth that are happening? How is that going to affect this?
Right. Well, we haven't done ourselves any favor in the last 2 years under this administration, basically bad-mouthing our allies and doing worse to our quote-unquote competition or our enemies. Well, doing worse to our competition, but embracing our enemies, right? So it's really the actual reverse. Right now, the G7 is really the G6. Okay.
Because we're not there.
We're not there. And even if we're there physically, nobody's talking to us because there was a photo that was published of the last G7 where President Trump is sitting with his arms folded, pouting. And you have the leaders of the world, Angela Merkel, you have the Prime Minister of Japan and others looking down at Trump just in frustration. And that's really the state of the free world and who's supposed to be a voice of reason. So now Eastern Europe and the rest of the world are saying, listen, we had to find a way to exist on our own without the United States because we can't trust what the United States says, which is a problem. Also, China is being the leader in Asia and across Africa, South America, and the Caribbean. And why do I say that? The United States, we pulled a lot of funding from those countries because we had to pay for these wars that we've been in Afghanistan and Iraq for 18 plus years. So in doing that, China actually has filled the void in giving money to those countries for building projects and the like. So there's been a lot of land grab and resource grab on the continent of Africa, also in South America, but there's been a lot of goodwill. Even now, Taipei, which is the capital of Taiwan, is actually losing a lot of good allies because a lot of the allies that they had are now joining with China. So again, because they were locked in civil war for a long time. So China is now, when we pulled out of TPP, China said, we'll fill the gap. Void. So it was make China great. And keep in mind, China they're in it for the long term. President Xi is president for life for the most part, since they changed their constitution. So the success of China is really built on President Xi's vision. And it is to basically be the leader in the world as it relates to peace and security, as it relates to economics and trade, and the like. And they're building it methodically.
So, okay, today is, because this is going to get me to the immigration issue, but today is the big protests against climate change, and young people have taken that over, and all around the world they're doing these protests and so forth. But as we look at the disasters that have been happening, the flooding and all of the things, and if we're stopping people from coming into our borders from the South, what happens when the world starts moving because because of all the flooding and the wildfires and all the things that are happening because of global warming?
Yeah.
Is that going to be ultimately an issue that the next president is going to have to deal with?
That's a major issue now. Matter of fact, we talked about it on this show several years ago, where we're not ready for what we call climate refugees, right? So these individuals who are fleeing these areas that are low-lying, and it's pretty much created because what we call industrial nations, or the northern nations of the world, have been putting out these toxic gases into the atmosphere, helping to warm the planet, helping to really destroy a lot of the natural resources for consumption, right? Now, with that being the case, number one, we're not ready for the influx of climate individuals escaping these natural disasters.
Is any country ready?
I think, there has been a case study, I want to say it was Switzerland or Sweden, where they built this wonderful retention wall, from flooding. And it cost, a few $1 billion, but it was basically working. And there was an idea that America can start investing in an infrastructure to do that, but we were fighting wars. Right. So you have infrastructure of New York, you have the infrastructure around the coastal areas of the world, New Orleans, those areas, they're not ready for the in Hampton Roads.
I was going to say, we're right here.
Right, in Hampton Roads, which becomes a national security issue because we have the largest Navy and, of course, the largest military installation in the country, largest Navy in the world for that matter. So, it really hinders our readiness, to go and attack these issues worldwide as it relates to conflict. Now, the other issue becomes we have children, I call them children, they're high school kids, they're out marching for climate change. They're aware that these things are happening, right? But it's really corporations that have to start, putting policies in place based upon governmental policy to curb, any type of continued global warming. Now, where we are, we're there now. So we have to deal with those effects, but we can make it better.
But we have a president who keeps rolling back a lot of those policies that the government has in place in order to stop some of this. So what's the incentive for a corporation? Then they're not going to do anything when President Trump says we don't have to worry about the Clean Water Act anymore.
Right. Look, the corporations there to make money, and those guys are getting as much as they can while they can.
Let's talk to Leonard in Norfolk. Hi, Leonard. You're on the air.
How you doing, Barbara? This is Leonard of the Journaling Guide.
Hi, Leonard. How are you?
Brother Colvin, how are you?
I'm doing fine, my brother.
Yes,
congratulations on being named as the NSU leader of that group. Got two questions for you.
Yes.
The first one is there is many of the politicians running for the Democratic nomination have been labeling Donald Trump a racist.
Right.
And a lot of people are saying that will only inspire his base, obviously, but people who are maybe sick of him and may want to go in a different direction, that will inspire them to vote for him. What do you think about that? And number two, if you consider the impact of the discussion about the crime bill that Clinton passed and Biden supported, which played a role in deterring a lot of African Americans from voting for Hillary because they thought she had a hand in that. What can be done to inspire millennials, particularly, who may be sort of leery about participating in the upcoming election because they think that Democrats have not served African Americans well over the years? They may be staying home.
Right.
What do you think about that? Those are two very important questions that a lot of people are asking.
Okay, Leonard, thanks so much for the call. And let me encourage all of our listeners, if you are not subscribers to the New Journaling Guide, please subscribe. It is the third oldest African-American newspaper in the country, and it is right here in Hampton Roads. Thanks so much, Leonard. We appreciate you.
Right.
Go ahead, Eric.
Well, to address your first question, Leonard, is, candidates calling Trump a racist will then inspire his base. His base is really inspired, and they're going to come out and vote. And I think it just gives energy. I agree to his base as well. I don't think it really energizes the opposition because, there's other things that he's doing and saying. But also there is what he does. He uses a lot of rhetorical devices in order to distract, distort, and to denigrate. And one thing that he does, he puts a little truth in it, things that people talk about around the dinner table, but not really talk in public, right? So when he mentioned Baltimore, a lot of people talk about the state of Baltimore. I mean, the city of Baltimore and the state of its infrastructure, the state of its residents there, and the poverty. And there are a lot of negative things about the city of Baltimore, which was ground zero for those HUD policies under the Nixon administration, as pointed out by Governor Romney, who was Mitt Romney's father, which got him ran out of the Nixon administration. But, so he talks about that, and people who live in Baltimore, people who's been to Baltimore, they talk about it. But then he takes some other rhetorical devices and insults individuals and so forth. So it gets people to say, well, you would think about it. Did he say anything that was wrong? But he was so nasty about it. So you now start to debate each other, and you totally forget about him. So it's a classic rhetorical device to distract and to distort. Now, as it relates to African-American youth, millennials engaging. Yeah. So, the greatest power that anybody has while you're alive on this earth is your voice. The greatest power that you have after you pass, of course, is what you leave in writings and, of course, your legacy. So I would encourage those African-Americans of that age group to engage with your voice. We've done it. They've done it with Black Lives Matter. They've done it in those instances. But the question now becomes, how do you sustain momentum? Because a lot of those kids, they got to go to work too, right? Or they're living at home, with the parents. So to sustain a voice, to sustain a movement, you need some type of funding.
You're on an HBCU campus, and in general, are you hearing conversations about voting? Are people being energized? It would seem to me that the HBCUs would be a natural incubation period point for that age group.
Yeah, it's 2019. It's not the election time, so individuals
still too early.
Right, still too early. Plus, in my position, I'm more so doing what I really love, and that's just reading through policy. So
I just wondered, as you walk the campus, are you hearing people talk about it? Or
I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything, and I don't have my finger on that particular pulse, so I can't speak to that intelligently.
So you're right. It is still early. Yeah. And the field is narrowing, from the 21, I think, that we started out with on the Democratic side in terms of potential candidates. At what point is it important for people to start paying attention?
Sure.
And when they start paying attention, what do they need to pay attention to?
Right. So they should have started paying attention yesterday. Okay. And the things that we talked about that I discussed recently is the economy. Really start to look at the policy and look at what's going on, right? So you want to start paying attention to the Federal Reserve, what their policy are. You really want to start paying attention to executive orders, what's coming down the pipe, because a lot of things aren't being passed through Congress. But you also want to pay attention to what's being passed. I always say follow the money, and you'll find out what the policy is. Before the break of Congress, they actually passed a joint funding bill to fund military for X amount of $100 million. And it was brokered with Paul Pelosi to also fund domestic programs at the same rate.
But didn't they also push down? So they did a temporary operating bill again. I call it operating, but a temporary bill to keep the government open. And we're going to have to face that again in November.
Exactly, because again, we're $1 trillion debt. So deficit. So until we either raise taxes on the wealthy, and I'm not promoting raising taxes on working class, because I think working class is taxed enough, but really raise taxes on corporations and put it back to the Clinton era taxes where we had a balanced budget, right?
So, Eric, but are we going to keep kicking the can down the road?
Of course.
So because there is no law that says we have to have a balanced budget or you have to pass a budget. Is that right?
It is, right. So you don't have to have a balanced budget. So here's the issue. If you look at who's leaving Congress, it's another issue we need to pay attention to. There are a lot of individuals who are not coming back for running for re-election, and they're leaving. They see the writing on the wall, and they're getting their money. They're cashing in now. Cashing in on their relationships. I shouldn't say getting their money, but cashing in on their relationships in order to secure their future after their service to the people in Congress. I'll say that. So you really want to pay attention to that. And again, membership has its privileges, so there's nothing wrong with that. They pass laws and ethics policies to govern themselves accordingly. So, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But you also want to pay attention to, again, what's happening overseas. We talked about China and Asia. We talked about Europe, also the Middle East. I've been a proponent saying, listen, pay attention to Iran, pay attention to what's happening in that area. And right now, there's quote unquote been an attack on Saudi Arabia. Pompeo, who's a leftover neoconservative, who's in the Trump administration, saying this is an act of war. Keep in mind, when Bolton was there, they got Trump to order a strike, on Iran, and he called it off while the planes were in the middle of the air. So we were close to kicking off this next conflict, which is going to draw, if Iran is attacked, it's going to draw China and Russia in. Okay, so I want to make sure that our listeners understand that. And it's going to draw the European nations in because it's happening in their backyard. And that's where
the beginning of World War III is coming.
It is. So you really want to pay attention to what's happening there. Pompeo's overseas now trying to gain some type of support. It's going to be a hard sell to the American people because we've been in Afghanistan so long, and in Iraq, we're still there. And it's really going to be a hard sell. I don't think that we will, as a nation, say, hey, we have to do something until we find that ourselves or another domestic attack on our land, or something that really hits us hard.
Okay, so with all that said, then what are your predictions?
Well, I believe in 2020, I believe that the House itself will remain at the balance that it is. And when I say approximate balance, I believe that the control will still be with the Democratic Party. I believe that the Senate will remain with the Republican Party. I believe that the U.S. Supreme Court balance of power will possibly be, well, right now it's really a 5-4. I believe by 2020 it'll be a 2021 a 6-3. I just don't think that Ginsburg can really hold up too much longer, given her sickness and her illness with pancreatic cancer, and we wish her the best in her treatment. I believe that the Republican nominee will be Donald Trump because there is absolutely no Republican that's able to stand up against him. I believe that Mike Pence will continue to be his running mate because Pence does bring in that evangelical middle of the country voter who is typically the Republican voters. In addition to that, I think that the Democratic nominee will end up being Elizabeth Warren. I believe that right now Joe Biden is under a lot of attack. He's under a lot of stress, and he's just not really built for a long term. I mean, this is 2019, and he's got to make it all the way till Super Tuesday. I think that Elizabeth Warren is going to really show a lot in Iowa. And if Elizabeth Warren is not the nominee and Joe Biden is, my suggestion to the DNC, if they're listening, is to basically request that Elizabeth Warren be vice president candidate and Joe Biden become the presidential candidate. That way you bring at least 60% of individuals who are excited about those candidates and the selection to the board. And the rest of the candidates, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and others who are currently legislators, then make I don't want to say deals, but
leadership within the government.
Leadership within the government, Attorney General, Secretary of Housing, and HUD, and so forth. I think that'll be a great mix for them. I think it'll be a winning formula. But do I believe that it will happen? I don't think so. I just don't think that the DNC really has the leadership. I don't think that the Democratic Party has the leadership. We talked about it during 2018. I think there's a class divide and a culture divide within the Democratic Party. I don't think when you say who's the leader, I don't think anyone can really say that there is a leader or that there is a vision. The class divide is also structured around gender and race. You have the four squad that they're being coined. It's represented by an African American female. It's represented by a Hispanic female, Middle Eastern female, and two Middle Eastern females, and they're all black and brown. And they've gotten a lot of attacks from the president and others. With that being said, I believe that based upon the lack of message continuity of the Democratic Party, I think based upon based upon the dysfunction that we see in government, I think based upon the lack of trust that American people have that government will work for them, I believe that based upon the lack of policies that help the working class, I do believe that Donald Trump will win the 2020 election. I came to this conclusion after the Mueller report. How do you mess that up? I have no idea, but they did. This new incident that's happening, whistleblower, it could be the Watergate moment, but I just don't have any faith that the other side can really muster up and do anything about it. So I believe that Donald Trump will be the next president in 2020. I do believe that the next president will also be a war president. So the question, the optics are, who do you see strongest against the world when it comes to our enemies? Would it be a Trump Pence, or would it be Elizabeth Warren and whoever? Right. So with that being the case, I also believe that the states that will decide this election again will be Michigan, it'll be Ohio, it'll be Pennsylvania, it'll be Florida, and maybe, just maybe, North Carolina.
Wow. Where would Virginia play in there?
Virginia is I think a solid blue state. I think there are just enough people to continue to
keep it blue.
Keep it blue. But there's also that chance, right? But I think Charlottesville, what Virginia doesn't want to be, I think the issue is that with the governor that he had, which I think he's come through, I think Virginia doesn't want to have that legacy. They want to see be a state, all people of the Commonwealth wants to be seen as a state that's moving forward, and that's embracing the future.
So you've mentioned this once before, and we got less than a minute. But the whole idea of a woman as a war president, you really think is problematic? From an optics perspective,
right. And again, I think all the candidates bring value what they're running. So that's not my personal opinion, right, but basically what I see, what America sees, and who they believe will want to lead them to victory.
All right, we'll see what happens. Thank you so very much, Dr. Eric Claville, who is the director of the Center for African American Policy. Right? Did I get that right?
Public policy, yes.
Public policy, absolutely.
Acronym CAMP.
And thank you all so very much for joining us today on Another View. I know that Eric has given you lots to think about. Just a reminder that the podcasts of all of our shows can be found at anotherviewradio.org. You can also sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. And you can find us on Facebook and on Twitter. Next week on Another View, we're going to talk about sports concussions, particularly for young people, and we'll talk about it from the perspective of how many poor Black and brown kids are playing contact sports more so than ever, and why they're making choices between a healthy brain and being able to come out of poverty. So that's all on Another View next week with cardiologist Dr. Keith Newby. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer, and Todd Washburn is our audio engineer. Thanks. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee, and I want to thank everyone again for being so generous with us during Pledge and for listening to Another View.